Some of these questions you're probably going to be used to. Some of them I hope you're not used to, but we got to start out with the obvious. And the obvious question is, what brought you to the drums? When did you start playing the instrument?
When I was about 10 years old, my family moved from Dayton, Ohio to Kingston, New York. And shortly after we moved, I got a letter from my best friend back in Dayton, Ohio, telling me that he had just started playing the drums. So sort of wanting to be like my buddy back in Ohio, I figured I'd go and start taking some drum lessons. And about 20 years later, I reconnected with that guy, and it turned out he took all of 2 drum lessons and moved on to other things. And I had no idea at the time, but I ended up sticking with it till, now I'm 43 years old, so we're 33 years later, here I am. But yeah, just sort of, one out of wanting to stay connected to my friend there, and shortly after moving to Ohio, I met some guys in the 5th grade that proved to still be my best friends to this day. So it's always had that connection for me of just kind of where some really, really strong friendships in my life originated.
Great. Could you be a little bit more specific about the drum lessons that you took? Could you tell us about those?
Yeah, so it started as with most people, just in elementary school band, and we do what you do to prepare for the holiday concert and learn some marches and things. And there was a guy in my hometown, or my new hometown of Kingston, New York, named Don Pearson, who was my first private teacher outside of the school band director. He was my first private teacher, and was was known in the area as where anyone who was relatively seriously interested in the drums, you would go study with Don Pearson. And as it happened, right up the street from Don Pearson's house, there was a McDonald's, and my drum lessons were on Saturday mornings at 10 o'clock, and my dad and I had a tradition that we would go get some McDonald's pancakes after my Saturday morning drum lessons. And
nice.
I loved those McDonald's pancakes. So I never missed a lesson. I was there enthusiastically every week, and over time started to figure out what I was doing on the instrument, obviously with the luck of Don's fantastic instruction.
Do you remember any specific books that he had you work out of? Were there any specific things that he used in his lessons to get you started?
As early as... unfortunately, Don passed when I was in the 9th grade. And I know that by the 9th grade, I was already reading out of and studying guys out of the Charlie Wilcoxon books and the George Lawrence Stone books and the Reed Syncopation books. And those are all books that I practice those to this day. Mm-hmm. So earlier than that, I don't necessarily recall. I'm sure it was just stuff to prepare for school repertoire and concerts and kind of get some rudiments together. Mm-hmm. But definitely by the 9th grade, we were dealing with Charles Wilcoxon, which is everything. And then Charles Wilcoxon for snare drum vocabulary and repertoire, and then starting to dig into things like the syncopation book for drum set type stuff.
Mm-hmm. Did you participate in the marching band or any of the other bands other than the symphonic band in school?
Yep, all the way through high school. Did the drum line and all through marching band. I played football as well for my first couple of years of high school, so it was one of those, be on the field during the game and run and change very quickly into the band uniform to go and do the halftime show with the band.
Oh, wow.
And then come back to be on the team for the last part of the game. But that was only until about 10th grade. But I had a fantastic time doing both. In 10th grade, it was the year that I still weighed 120 pounds, and the rest of the guys my age were shooting up towards 150, 160, and it stopped making sense for me to play football anymore. I wasn't doing so well out there.
Mm-hmm. What'd you play? What'd you play in the drum line?
I like to say that I moved pretty quickly up to snare drum, but I'm sure I did the normal progression of starting on cymbals and on to bass drum and snare drum, and I think by the time I graduated, I was playing quads or quints. Nice.
Yeah, I think we all pretty much went that path.
Yeah.
That was pretty common.
I would like to say by 7th grade I was playing snare drum 1, but I'm sure it was more like 11th grade or something.
Yeah, I made captain, so it was easy for me to make those decisions in the last couple years because I was in charge. But I had to work my way up too. So a lot of good memories though in school playing in all those different bands.
Yeah, and that community. That band community really was the center of my social world through high school. And I think it planted a lot of seeds for me in that the music world to this day remains my general community, or at least the basis for my general community in life. And I think that's been a big part of what music has meant to me is, long-term relationships and sort of the camaraderie and the teamwork of being involved in music.
When you were in high school, did you play in any garage bands or any rock bands or anything like that?
Oh, absolutely. Myself and some kids in the area, we definitely had a pretty solid Metallica cover band going for 9th and 10th grade.
Nice.
Yeah, and whatever kind of hard rock or sort of metal-ish type stuff that we could figure out how to play at the time. We definitely would play For Whom the Bell Tolls about 20 times in a row because it was the only song we knew how to play, so we just kept playing that one. I had a pretty wide-ranging musical interest from early on. So I would come home from school or whatever sports practice, and I would put on a variety of records to play along with, everything from Art Blakey records to some Tony Williams records up through like Whitesnake and Metallica and Earth, Wind and Fire, and just a wide range of music that I was just into playing along with, and that's really what I did. I spent hours and hours playing along the records.
When you were at this point, did you guys play any gigs? Did you do any parties or played in any gigs during that time?
Not really. There's not a lot of opportunity for that type of a thing. The school jazz band that I played in, we had a really, really great jazz band led by a guy named Tom King, who was also the marching band director and the concert band director. He led our jazz band that was pretty active, and that led to some nice opportunities to play in public. But especially for the kind of for my garage band, for the kind of music that we were playing, there weren't a lot of public opportunities where anyone kind of wanted to hear us doing that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So what kind of gigs did you do with the jazz band?
I remember some gigs in the local shopping mall, and there would be, if there was ever kind of a local fair going on or some sort of a church event going on, that the band would find its way to be involved in those type of things. I also had the good fortune, now that I think about it, there was a local Elks Lodge big band that a friend of the family, a guy named Barry Lipschitz, played trumpet in that local Elks Lodge big band. And he invited me. I remember playing several rehearsals with those guys. So that was an opportunity to sort of be the young kid in a big band of adults who were, very, very generous and gracious to allow me to come in and read through or attempt to read through their charts and kind of do what I could to keep up with them. And that was a really, really great experience.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to that, where I grew up in the Catskills there were a lot of the old hotels that were kind of depicted in the movie Dirty Dancing. A lot of the old, summer vacation resort hotels that people from the city would go up to the Catskills and vacation in. And those hotels were still somewhat active in the late 80s when I was starting to become musically active in the area there. And there were a couple of guys, band leaders in that circuit. One guy in particular named Don Moore, who would invite me to come to their gigs. And I don't remember ever really playing, but I do remember just sitting in a chair next to the drummer on the stage and just sitting next to him and watching him do his job and watching how the communication on the bandstand worked and just observing kind of how their evening went and how things flowed. And that was really, really formative. I still remember several nights just come sit next to this guy and watch what he does. That was really, really generous of him to allow me to do.
Now, speaking about education, let's jump forward because you have such an educational background, especially during your adult years. And, you furthered your education as an adult at the University of Southern California, and you obtained a master's degree in jazz studies. So obviously you retained that interest in jazz. Can you tell us about that experience?
I started with my undergrad at USC, and as I was saying, having grown up in the Catskills of New York, New York City was right there, about 100 miles south of us, and I just kind of understood musically that I wasn't ready to make it to just show up in New York City. And Los Angeles seemed like a relatively advisable choice in terms of a place where there was a jazz scene where I could go and study and maybe get myself together a little bit without going down to New York. I also had it in my mind, kind of with my father's guidance, that I wanted to be a well-rounded drummer or professional and not just focused on straight-ahead jazz, and the breadth of the entertainment scene in Los Angeles in general might offer a path to that. So I came out to LA to go to USC, and I had a scholarship to be in the jazz studies department there, and it was my plan at the time. For the first couple of years, it worked out okay. It was my plan at the time to secretly double major in poli-sci, to kind of leverage my music scholarship into a double major in poli-sci with kind of a loose eye towards law school, in case things sort of continued to pique my interest that way. And unfortunately, sure enough, after a couple of years, the jazz department started to notice all these poli-sci courses on my sign-up sheet and started to ask, why are we paying for all these poli-sci courses? What's going on here? Mm-hmm. And once they caught wind of my plan, they weren't as enthusiastic about sponsoring me for my poli-sci degree, so that went away. And then, relatively quickly enough, I was lucky enough to form some great relationships in Los Angeles with some drummers that have gone on to do great things and still remain great friends and sort of mentors and influences on me. Guys like Trevor Lawrence Jr., who was a sophomore at USC when I showed up. And there's a jazz drummer named Willie Jones III, who was a phenomenal drummer, who was just in Los Angeles in general, a few years older than us, playing with a group called Black Note at the time. And those guys came out of a community near a neighborhood called Lemert Park, where Billy Higgins had set up a performance space. So there was a good deal of drummers and young, forward-looking, aspiring jazz musicians that came out of the Lemert Park area in Billy Higgins that those guys came out of, and they were gracious enough to kind of bring me into that community and help me get established in Los Angeles. So all that to say, by the time I was a junior at USC, I was starting to get pretty active gigging-wise, and out of necessity, it's how I was paying my bills and my rent and managing to eat, is gigging several times a week here in LA from early on, particularly, thankfully.
Could you tell us a little bit about the band that you were gigging with?
That was just in LA was just catching what catch can in terms of just being available for whatever gigs happened to come along. When I first showed up, I was lucky enough to be kind of active with a group called the Young Americans, who were based out of Orange County, California. And that all came about because the summer between my senior year of high school and my freshman year of college, I spent a summer in Boyne, Michigan, playing in the pit orchestra for an organization called the Young Americans, who are like a show choir kind of a group. And we spent the summer there playing for essentially like a dinner theater musical show kind of situation. And their being based in Orange County gave me access to just going down about an hour away from Los Angeles and playing rehearsals and shows with them to get a little bit of activity going on. And that really, really sustained me through my first year out here in LA. And then my second year as well, by that time I started to get a little bit of local work, just playing some jazz or whatever gigs around town. And it continued that way for quite a while. It was maybe until just before I graduated, before I found my way into some actual bands.
Now, you also graduated with honors from the Thelonious Monk Institute of Jazz. I'm unfamiliar with that. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
So that's a fellowship program it's run by an organization called the Thelonious Monk Institute of Jazz, who started a fellowship program, a 2-year fellowship program that continues to this day. The class that I was in, I think, was the second or third class that they had done, and now, however many years later, they're still going on. And that is when I did my master's degree at the same time as being a fellow in the Thelonious Monk Institute of Jazz. So what they do is they essentially audition students from around the world and put together a band. And then they house that band in partnership with a university. It originally started at the New England Conservatory of Music, then it moved to USC. It spent some time in New Orleans, and now it's back here in Los Angeles at UCLA. You spend 2 years in that band, and every couple of weeks they will bring in a jazz master to come in and spend a week with the band. So you spend a week learning the music of, or playing with, spending time with, and kind of just absorbing the presence and information of people like Terrence Blanchard, Bobby Watson. We were extremely lucky enough to have Herbie Hancock and Wayne Shorter come in. Hal Crook came in, Roy Haynes and Terry Clark. Terry. And it affords a connection to musicians that 50 years ago people may have had access to on a regular basis just because that's how the jazz scene worked. But the way the jazz community works now, we just don't have as regular, easy access to the elders and masters of the music. So the thing that institute really does a great job of is picking a group of people and saying, okay, for 2 years, we're just going to help you form relationships with and spend time with some of the greater practitioners of the art form. And in doing that, we are hoping to ensure its perseverance and kind of continued evolution. So it was a really, really fantastic thing to participate in. And as an option, I chose to go ahead and work on my master's degree while I was there. So I was quite busy, but it worked out very well.
Now, through your education and you know all the things that you went through, and even today, you have such a diverse style, and it really bridges that gap between jazz and pop and some big band. And from a technical aspect, how did you develop such depth in your playing, utilizing all these different styles that you have been forged from?
You know, really, really early on, I had the musical interest, but I also had the, how would you say, the economic motivation to make sure that I was able and interested and genuinely able to add to any kind of musical environment. And to this day, it is, you know, you kind of, you specify technically, to this day, it's really not easy. From a technical standpoint and just from an equipment and gear standpoint, I tend to want to hear, if I'm playing straight ahead jazz, I want it to be on drums and cymbals and tunings that are meant for straight ahead jazz, not maybe necessarily something that's more contemporary, but let's just go ahead and make it work. And if I'm playing pop or contemporary or funk music, I really prefer it to be on drums and cymbals and tunings that make sense for that music. So all that to say, I set my mind to doing it really early on, and I spent a lot of time studying the drummers of those different styles and making sure that I, most importantly, avoided fixed opinions. By spending time crossing the divide between those worlds regularly, you'll often come across jazz musicians who have very low regard for pop musicians and pop musicians who don't necessarily have extremely high regard for what it takes to be a high-functioning jazz musician, and those opinions can be impediments to understanding. So early on, very, very quickly when I arrived in Los Angeles, I found my way to two teachers that I was studying with at the same time, one being Ndugu Chancellor and the other being Jeff Hamilton. And those couldn't be more different examples of approach to the instrument and sound and career paths in terms of variety. And that was exactly what I wanted, and I was lucky enough to find two people that I felt would help me to become who I wanted to be as a drummer, in that they were such opposites, and I wanted to find a way to be able to exist in both of those worlds. And it's really, it's a true challenge that I try to maintain. Touch-wise, I can tell you I'm not the hardest hitting drummer in the world, as I've lost enough work for not hitting the drums hard enough. I can do it, and I'm willing to do it for about an hour, but I'm not necessarily interested, and I'm not the guy to just lay into the drums for a 3-hour show. So it still is a challenge. I am able to do it, and it's just something that I think it's about research and understanding and keeping an open mind in terms of what your reference points are in each style.
I apologize. I skipped a question that we're going to put further back in the interview. I forgot to ask you what drummers influenced you. In fact, let's just say what drummers influenced you back in the day and what drummers influence you today.
I'll put a bit of a disclaimer at the front of this answer. So I think any well-studied drummer will answer with the obvious touchstones of people that they should have touched upon in their education. So as far back as Big Sid and going into Max Roach and Philly Joe Jones and on into Roy Haynes and Tony Williams. And as Tony started playing electric music, you start getting into people like Erskine on through more of the fusion drummers. And then into Jack Deezer. So there are your obvious touchstones. What I'm always interested in when I hear someone answer this question are the drummers that you spent time with personally that influenced you, musically and rather uniquely that maybe not every other drummer who listened to the Milestones record 100 times was also influenced by. So for me, that's Billy Higgins, where just the opportunity to spend time in Los Angeles, literally, having lunch with, eating with, talking with, and being around Billy as a person and a drummer was a huge, huge influence. And then that also goes into people that I now feel lucky enough to kind of consider my peers. Willie Jones III, who's a phenomenal jazz drummer, and Trevor Lawrence Jr., who's another example of someone who is really, really great at multiple styles. He's an amazing jazz drummer and a really, really great pop, hip-hop and R&B drummer as well. Some more of my immediate peers of people that I spent time around, like Jeff Hamilton, again, obviously someone that I studied with. One major influence for me as drummer and person is someone who I studied with very, very later on, and that's someone named Michael Carvin. And I came across Michael Carvin because I started to notice that all of the drummers that I admired the most, all of the younger kind of groundbreaking drummers that I looked up to had at one point studied with Michael Carvin. And he really, really, not just on the instrument, but as a person, individual, man, kind of member of society, really, really helped me to figure out sort of where I was, where I wanted to be, and kind of, as he says, Michael likes to say that he will introduce you to yourself. And I really felt that that's exactly what Michael did with me, both individually and as a drummer.
That's a great saying, introduce you to yourself. That's great.
Yeah, it's not something that I'd heard before studying with him, and it really is what he does if someone is open enough to allow him to do it. And there's a common thread I find amongst his students that stick with him, that they have an individuality that I think he really helped them to achieve.
Mm-hmm. Great. Now, when you look at the list of marquee artists that you played with, and I'm going to put this list in this paragraph because I think it's incredibly impressive, but obviously, the one that really stands out is Michael Buble. You were with him for, I think it was about 8 years. How did you get that gig?
That started from relationships at USC. A lot of the guys that I went to USC with, mostly while I was in grad school, while I was at the Monk Institute, there was a community of guys that ended up in his very first band when he first put together a band as a signed artist with Warner Brothers. And obviously just being friends with those guys, kept in touch with them and was aware of what they were doing. And what I was of the opinion at the time were like, yeah, guys, that's, have fun for a little while, but that's probably an artist that's going to stick around for about 18 months, and then you should go look for something else to do, was a little bit of what I was telling my buddies at the time. And sure enough, 3 years later, it was obviously a lot longer than 18 months later, there happened to be an opening in the drum chair, and they reached out to me and asked me if I was interested in coming in auditioning, and fortunately that went well enough. And most of all, I was interested in reconnecting with my buddies from grad school. I was living in New York at the time, and I was doing well, but I was working like a dog to do well, sometimes 2 or 3 gigs in a day. And the idea of just kind of stepping back and doing 1 gig a day and spending some time with my buddies from school seemed pretty appealing to me. And I think I even started with them in January of 2005. So the idea of getting out of New York in the month of January also seemed like a good idea.
No doubt.
Yeah.
Well, he must have been incredibly impressed with you to have you being on his drum chair for so many years.
It was a really, really formative experience for me. I learned a lot. 8 years is a long time, and we're about the same age. So I think I was 30 when I joined his band, which would have made him 30 as well. So he was very much in a place, was interested in working very hard, and he stayed on the road, and he's a particularly hard worker himself as an individual. But it was 8 years of some rather intense touring. And for me, as I grew up in that band, it was an interesting experience for me, where I used to enjoy touring because on the road, whatever hotel we were staying in was absolutely going to be much better than whatever apartment I was living in. So I was always very excited to go out on the road. And as the years went by and I started to do some things differently in my personal financial life and make some investments, as my home life started to get better and better, and eventually the hotels stopped being better than my house, and I started really enjoying being home. And I think for a lot of people, once you cross that divide, unless you're someone who just really, really loves being on the road, once home is more comfortable than the road, it's only a matter of time until you're going to find your way off the road.
Now, he puts a lot of stuff into his act. I know he does a lot of humor in his shows and calls people up and stuff. As a band, did you guys have to react to him on stage? I mean, because it was a lot more than just playing music. At least it seems that way.
How to say? I think, so this is both as applies to him and entertainers in general, but I think this really makes sense for what works for him. He is a very disciplined entertainer, but within that discipline, and I say discipline in terms of we would play that same show every night for a year and a half sometimes. The set was the set, and we just kept doing it, and sometimes even the jokes were the jokes. But within that discipline, one inevitably looks or craves some surprise. So one thing that I think he did as a matter of instinct, or I'll say admire his willingness to allow himself to do it, is he would look for things to surprise himself just for his own personal entertainment, and look for opportunities just to make a radical left turn. And in those instances, it wasn't easy to react and respond genuinely, because you were very appreciative of, oh, hey, this is new. And you were going to really enjoy the moment and the surprise of, hey, I wonder where this is going to go. What's difficult is when it is the same joke for the 200th time, it's difficult as the musician to not let on to the audience that you've heard this joke 200 times. But it's masterful of the joke teller to be able to tell it and get a reaction each of those 200 times. It's beyond masterful to me. Mm-hmm. And that applies to comedians or whomever, the ability to deliver something in a way that feels fresh, even though you just did it last night, the night before, the night before, the night before. Mm-hmm. It's so impressive and masterful, and I have to admire anyone who can do that.
Now, when I was preparing for this interview, I found a video on YouTube of you doing a solo at one of his shows. And number one, did you do that every night? And number two, did you improvise that, or was it pre-planned?
That solo only stuck around for maybe a little bit over a year. And there were a couple of solos that existed in my tenure in the band. The one that I think you're referring to, with a little bit of both, a little bit of improvised and pre-planned. With the amount of, because it's the same solo, it's relatively short, but it's the same solo in the same spot of the same arrangement of every night. And you start to find the things that work, and you do those over and over and over again for a while. And then you say, okay, now tonight I'm going to make myself not do any of the things that I know have been working, and I'm going to find something different. And then you do that for a couple months, and then now you have a whole new set of things that work, and then you say to yourself, okay, none of that stuff, let's go find something new. And you just kind of, at least for me, this is how I organized my time on the road is, okay, now I'm going to go find a whole new set of stuff, and I'll build a new kind of vocabulary for these moments. And that applies kind of both to individual solos and just a set of music over the course of a concert as a whole. You know, and when you are really playing the same arrangements over and over and over again, you start asking yourself, well, does this song feel better if I'm leaning 3 inches to my left, or does it feel better if I'm leaning 3 inches to my right? You're really just you're getting into the details of anything you can do to find it, make it feel interesting and fresh, and make it better. And so that takes me, I'll go back quickly to, in the Monk Institute, one of the people we had come through was Bobby Watson, who was the musical director for a little while in Art Blakey's band. And anyone who knows Art Blakey's band, there was a time, like, you're gonna play Blues March, you're gonna play Monin, you're gonna play A Night in Tunisia, you're gonna play this certain canon of music that Art Blakey's band was known for, and they played it for 20, 30 years. And one of the stories Bobby told us, which was really, really helpful to me, is that whenever someone new would come into the band, inevitably everyone else in the band knew that at some point that person is going to hit a point of absolute mind-numbing boredom. And about 3 months after the mind-numbing boredom is when that person is going to start to sound amazing in the band. And the lesson was that you had to get to the place where you were beyond bored, where you were just desperately looking for things to be inventive and things to surprise yourself with. And that's where the magic really started to happen. And I took that lesson into environments like the Buble band, where inevitably, if you're playing something that many times, you're going to hit boredom, but the real fun exists on the other side of that boredom. And it's a great, great lesson that really worked for me.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, you've done extensive touring and studio recordings, and you've even done a lot of television appearances, and you talked a little bit before about gear. How do you prepare for these different opportunities, and if so, how do you prepare for different opportunities, whether it's touring, studios, and television?
You really try what you can. You try your best to get the gear that you want for the situation. And once you've done everything you can to try to get what you need, you let go and accept the gear that shows up. And it's just one of those. And so when you add to that in a TV show or even lots of concert environments, a lot of the times you don't have access to the instrument until you're essentially sitting down, picking up your sticks, and the band leader's counting off the tune. And you just kind of have to let go of certain things. So you develop a way of communicating in your writer that hopefully influences people to bring you what it is that you're asking for, or at least lends to an understanding that gets you as close as you can get to what you're asking for. You hopefully have a crew that knows how to get the sound that you're looking for, and beyond that, you bring a ability to recognize the sound of an instrument and find how to play that instrument within the framework of what you are, of the music that you're playing. So if you've asked for a set of DW collector series, which have a very certain sound, and you show up and there's a pair of Yamaha Maple Absolutes, which are beautiful drums as well, but have a very, you don't try to force the Maple Absolutes to sound like the DW collector series, because they're not going to do it. The Yamaha Absolutes are just a brighter, they have more high-end, more attack. They're a faster sounding instrument, and hopefully you have spent enough time on different instruments that you approach those drums differently than you do the other drums. And I think that is pretty important, if you care. Mm-hmm. There's also drummers who just don't care. They're just going to sit down, they're going to hit the thing as hard as they can, and they're going to walk away and have a beer and have a great night. I'm just not one of those guys. I want to hear the instrument. I want to hear the tone. And you just have to understand different drums and what they want to be, and then try to let them be what they should be.
How about when you're in the studio, whenever you're bringing your own drums in, do you play with a click?
Yes. Hopefully as often as possible, I'm very, very happy and welcome using a click. There are some singer-songwriter environments or pop music environments where the artist has it in their mind of like, you know what, guys, I just want this to feel natural, and I just want it to, if it speeds up, fine, if it slows down, fine, I don't want to be tied to a click. And everyone's saying, yeah, man, that sounds great. But you're thinking, or I'm thinking to myself, nah, because when this record goes out, I want the time to be correct, and can we have a click, please? Because I want to make sure that I don't want it to speed up. I don't want it to slow down. I want it to kind of feel great, and I don't want to have to be wrestling the rest of the band if they're trying to play it at a different tempo than where it should be. I want to be able to say, hey, guys, this is the tempo we decided on. Let's at least give me a click, and you guys do what you want, and I'll keep it steady for you. We played with a click for most of the show for the years that I was in the Buble band, and that was just a really phenomenal experience for me, just having to do it every night and get incredibly comfortable with it. And you start to feel the time in a very, very physical way when you have that ability to settle in and push and pull against the click. Mm-hmm, so, long answer, but if they'll let me, I love having it there.
Now, you had mentioned a DW Collector series as far as gear. What kind of gear are you using now? What's your preference?
These days, I really, really love their jazz series. I love all of their instruments, and I particularly love their jazz series in that most of the music that I play these days kind of responds a little bit more to Shell's I were playing stuff where I was hitting a little bit harder, or I needed a little bit more of beef, then, gosh, I hope those guys don't kill me for saying this. If I were playing, a little bit of a different style of music, then that reinforcement makes a lot of sense to me. But I love that collector series. So I love that jazz series and the collector series. And then recently I got a kit from them that's one of their PDP series that has the wood hoops. I forget what the actual name for it is. It's like one of their performance series that they put out recently, and it's a little jazz kit that I got that are very, very light shells, and they have wood hoops on them, and that is just a beautiful, beautiful sounding set of drums. So I'm playing that as well on a lot of stuff around town.
How about cymbals?
I'm a Zildjian guy with a pretty good vintage K collection. My vintage Ks don't come out of the house that much, and the one really annoying thing about Zildjian these days is they completely devalued the value. They completely undercut the value of vintage cymbals, and that now the cymbals that they're putting out sound so good and so amazing, where jazz guys used to have to go and find these old collectible item vintage Ks, and now the cymbals that Zildjian are putting out are just beyond amazing, that my old Ks aren't worth what they were worth 10 years ago.
Huh.
So I spend a lot of time with an overhammered cymbal that Zildjian first kind of put out, associating with Jeff Ballard, a drummer that I really look up to. And I also spent a lot of time with a dry complex ride that Zildjian put out, associated with Bill Stewart. In addition to, there's a bounce ride that's kind of put out in conjunction with Kenny Washington. So all three drummers that I really, really look up to. And those are the three sounds of theirs that I tend to go to in terms of rides. But I'm still a little upset about the value of my old Ks. If I ever went to sell them, they're just not worth what they used to be.
Do you have a choice of snare?
There's a handful of DW snares that I grab depending on the environment. I have two of their jazz series snares. Just one's a 5.5 and one's a 5 3/4 by 14 snare drums, and those are incredibly versatile. I keep die-cast hoops on the both of them, and I'm lucky enough to have a couple solid shells of theirs that are just phenomenal. One of them is a 15-inch round solid shell that if I'm recording brushes, I particularly like to bring that 15-inch snare out for if I'm playing like a brush ballad or something. It's just great sounding drum.
So you mentioned whenever you're playing out, what are you doing now? What kind of bands or performances? What are you up to?
The two things I'm spending the most time with here in LA are we just released a record with an artist named Ty Taylor that I was fortunate enough to co-produce. We actually just released it. Today's Tuesday. We did a release party for it this past Friday, May 11th. Ty is the lead singer of a band called Vintage Trouble, and he also composed a set of original music in the sort of style of jazz standards. So it's his new original music, but very much in the style of standards from the 50s. And I'm really enjoying being a part of that, and that record hopefully will do very well. And it's kind of a remarkable piece of work that I highly recommend if anyone has a moment to take a listen to. Some of playing-wise, it's some of the stuff I'm most proud of. And then there's an artist named Chris Pierce. Ty is one of my oldest friends, and Chris as well is one of my oldest friends. We were actually at USC together. And I've been off the road. I've been lucky enough to reconnect with Chris. And Chris is like getting to play behind Bill Withers or Donny Hathaway or someone like that. It's just a phenomenal, true R&B singer with great original music who has built a tremendous following here in Southern California, and somewhat nationally and internationally as well. So getting to play behind those two guys is just really something I can consider myself very lucky to be able to do.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
Well, tell us
Sorry,
all about...
Michael, 1 second. Hey, I'm on the phone. Sorry, Michael.
That's okay. Tell us all about On the Beat Music Agency.
So that is the other thing that really takes up most of my time. And what I was alluding to when I was talking about making some decisions in my personal life while I was on the road is I started setting up a music agency here in Los Angeles where I'm booking people on gigs around town. Everything from some of our clients are some of the nicer hotel properties around Southern California, and we do a lot of high-end weddings and corporate events as well. We do over 40 gigs a week, and there's nothing I love more than calling up people in my community and saying, hey, what are you doing, Thursday night, June, whatever, I've got a gig for you. Can you go do it? I really love being in the position where I'm hiring my friends, I'm hiring my colleagues, and hiring musicians that I believe in, and sending them into situations that are hopefully I've done a good job and set up the situation properly, where all they have to do is worry about showing up and playing and doing a great job, and everything else that they'd ever have to worry about, I've taken care of for them. So that also enables me to be home for dinner more nights a week than instead of going out myself and working 7 nights a week. I'm able to be home with my young children for dinner, and it really has been a phenomenal direction for me to go in as a person, and it's something that my